Welcome to the Building and Growing podcast. We're very lucky to have Matt from Snackr with us today. Welcome, Matt.
Lovely. Thanks, Luke. It's good to be here.
Lovely to have you here. Matt, you're one of the co-founders of Snackr. Would you like to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your sort of previous experience, and then provide us with an intro to Snackr?
Yeah, for sure. Great to be here, Lucas, and thanks for having me on. I came from Perth, Western Australia, so we have sort of some shared common ground there, but worked previously in consulting and corporate finance.
Yes.
And then decided to sort of foray into the startup world. I was always on the lookout for sort of innovative ideas and really interested in tech, love project. But the way that Snackr came about was I was at the very first game at the brand new Optus Stadium. It's a beautiful stadium in Perth.
Oh, yes, yeah,
and
lovely
they have
place.
Great, right? And they have the very first cricket match, the ODI. It's the debut event that's ever been run there, and we were getting absolutely spanked by the Poms. And I went down to get around. I was with my other co-founder at the time, a bunch of mates. And as I was in line to get food and drinks, I heard the crowd go crazy. And I was like, this is ridiculous. So I sort of huffed and puffed and went back to my seat. And as I got back to my seat, I found out that what I'd missed wasn't a wicket or a six or anything like that. It was the very first streaker that actually ran across the ground. So it was a historic moment in Perth, in Perth history, and I missed it. And then actually on that day, I ordered Uber Eats to my house for dinner that night, even though I was 150 steps away from getting the same food at the stadium.
Yes.
And so I sort of went back and was like, this is ridiculous. There has to be a better way to, there's food right there. Why didn't I go and get something to eat?
Yeah.
Anyway, the next morning I sat down with a mate and we were doing sort of back of the napkin calculations of what it would look like. And that was sort of the birth of Snackr.
Fantastic.
And now what Snackr is it's a mobile ordering platform for stadiums and live events.
Yes.
So basically you're sitting in a stadium, you're watching football, you're at a concert or whatever. You put in your seat location and then you can order from the vendors that are around for in-seat delivery or for pickup.
Fantastic. I love it because, often the startup ideas which gain the most traction are the ones that really solve a problem, and you've just articulated that problem perfectly. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's sort of we've all been very lucky with Snackr because it's sort of the perfect pub idea because you can convey that problem and it's so visceral and everyone understands what that feeling's like, that anxiety of, waiting in line during an event that you've paid £200 to go and see.
Yeah.
Everyone understands that. So you can convey our problem within 7 seconds and that's made it really easy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess building on the back of the napkin calculations, how did you then calculate, let's say, the total addressable market and opportunity for Snackr, which then I suppose influenced you to go and pitch to different VCs?
Yeah, it's a funny one because I came from my background's in corporate finance and in infrastructure, which is basically the complete opposite of startup world, right?
Yes.
It's like fixed discount rates, 40-year terms on projects, that kind of thing. And so the idea of forecasting something out that could fluctuate, I mean, you don't even know what the product is at that stage. You don't know how you're going to charge people for it. You don't even know who your customers are.
Yes.
And so you're looking at this world and the way that I would evaluate a project back then is completely different to the way that I would address it now. But what I did was basically look up, I listened to every podcast that I could. I probably would have listened to this one back in the day. I read everything that I could about it. And then that was how I came across sort of that TAM, SAM, SOM, total addressable market theory. Yes. And the way that I did it initially was I just looked at, what are sort of comparable products that we wanted to be, which was like an Uber Eats, a Deliveroo, a Just Eat, that kind of thing. And how do they measure their market? And, an industry term there, I guess, is gross market value. So they were looking at what's the total amount of transactions they're putting through their product. And so what I did there was I just looked at, a kind of a market sizing exercise that you would do in any sort of consulting interview.
Yes.
But, number of stadiums in the world, number of events per stadium, how many fans would they get, what percentage of those fans would order food and drinks, what would be the average size of those transactions. I sort of tried to get some nuance in it to break it down into regionality and that kind of thing.
Yes.
And then ended up at a number where we were comfortable that it was a big enough market to be able to go for. I think it was about 25 billion pounds.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, so reasonable enough that, it was worth having a punt.
Excellent. And so you talked about the experience before of, calling Uber Eats or using the app to order Uber Eats, and it came to your house, even though, the restaurant was the same distance as you were seating-wise from, vending a vendor within the stadium. So, now you've moved from Perth, you're here in the UK. Can you talk us about the sort of customer experience?
Sure. So for a fan, it's really straightforward. We've had a few iterations of, what that product looks like. But fundamentally, the problem we're solving is that people don't want to wait in line.
Yes.
So I think research shows that, on average, people around the world want to wait in a queue for about 10 minutes.
Yes.
But they actually wait in a queue in a stadium for about 18 to 30 minutes.
Okay, wow.
And that's led to huge attrition in people transacting.
Yes.
So what the experience is with us is basically you don't wait in line. So when you still have all the issues with a vendor, with the amount of load that you have going through the system. The kitchens, you can only produce so many of the goods at once. You only have so many staff. But what our system does is that it smooths that demand over an event to make it more manageable for the venue to be able to process those orders.
Yes.
So as a fan, you're basically seeing a QR code on the back of the seat in front of you. You're scanning it. You're not downloading anything. So it's just all a web app. It's all very lightweight, easy to use, and optimized for poor connection.
Okay.
You just process your order. So you choose the items that you want. You can check out, discount codes, all the payment methodologies, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And then you'll just get a text message when your order's ready. And if you order for pickup, you get a text when it's ready to be picked up. Or if it's for delivery, you'll get a message when the runner's at the end of the aisle.
Fantastic. That's incredible. And in terms of the payment side of things, with a fintech background, always really interested in this. For me, at least as a consumer, Apple Pay seems to, really knock out the sort of friction. What payment methods have you got currently within, let's say, the web app for consumers?
Yeah, so we have Apple Pay and Google Pay, and they are easily the most frictionless payment methodologies.
Yes.
And because it's housed in the web app, there's no sort of integrations there. It's already housed, it's cached in your browser, and it's sort of all managed that way. But it also has preloading of your card, so you can scan your card if you want to. You can input the numbers individually, but for most people, it will come up automatically because it's in your browser.
Yes.
So yeah, all really secure, all really straightforward, and really what we're trying to get to is we're trying to minimize the time that someone goes from scanning that QR code to checking out, so that they can spend more time enjoying the game.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and that's where the sort of tech app side of things comes in, where you're minimizing the amount of clicks and friction to get to the order.
That's right. As much as we can shorten that time frame, then we're doing our job.
Fantastic. So you've spoken about the customers and what their journey looks like when they're ordering food from the seat, but it's and it's a great tech innovation in terms of giving them the opportunity to do this. But I'm conscious that there's the operational sort of promise on the other side. Could you talk about the experience for the vendors?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because when we first started, we were completely fan focused.
Yes.
How can we solve this problem for the fan? And really the focus was on improving the fan experience. And what we kind of missed in that whole part of our history was understanding that ultimately our customers are the venues and the vendors that operate in those venues.
Yes.
And so we really had to sharp pivot and optimize our product and our business model to make it work for the venues.
Yes.
And so a lot of the focus in a lot of our innovation, a lot of our product development has been in making it as user-friendly, as easy to implement and use for the vendors. Because, a unique problem for technology in this space is that the staffing is so transient.
Okay.
So you'll have, a student who's working on one Sunday, but the next Sunday it could be someone completely different. They all come from massive, contracting agencies that send out, thousands of staff every weekend. You don't know where they're going to go.
Yeah.
So
I remember working for them in Perth during uni days. The big day out and other sort of festivals like that.
That's right. Yeah. So you need to have someone, who's, 19, completely disinterested, walk into that job, pick up what Snackr is, understand what they need to do, and be guided through it in a really seamless way.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're going to have friction and you're going to have people sort of not wanting to adopt it.
Yes.
So in terms of getting the retailers up and running, it needs to be really seamless. Mm-hmm. So for us, we provide all of the equipment. We do all of the sort of implementation. We go down there and set it up, connect it to the internet. Yes. All of the technology comes with Snackr preloaded on it. Mm-hmm. And then for the, we normally do like a ramp up stage, so we don't do 100% of a venue to start off with.
Yes.
But we'll provide training and operational support to start off with to make sure that, they're guided through that process and they understand what needs to be done.
Yeah, fantastic. So I think, the point you mentioned about having new staff quite often, because, it could be a sort of short-term gig work or contract work. How do you solve that problem in particular of educating somebody on the Snackr app and what to do in a short period of time? I recall when I was working at British Airways, the cabin attendants would say that when they went on a 747 prior to, say, a 10-hour flight, the team themselves only had about 7.5 minutes together to sync before the flight. And I imagine, the turnaround time would be quite similar when it comes to helping these new employees who might only be working for that day in that stadium to get acquainted with you. So what's your approach there?
Yeah, it's that's really interesting because it is very similar, right? And it can happen in the middle of an event. So you might be repurposing staff who come in, and then you have to they'll have to be able to pick it up and do it. And there's sort of two answers to it. The first one is with our product, it's about, and the same thing with the fan, simplifying that flow so that they can check out really quickly. It's about simplifying the flow for the whoever's using it. So for example, whoever's managing the vendor, or if they're runners, if they're using the runner app. Simplifying those actions so that it's just really 3 primary actions that they need to do, rinse and repeat, to process an order. So really they just, print a receipt, they use the receipt to pack the order, which is sort of known what they need to do. Okay. They'll mark it as ready, and then they'll mark it as complete, and that's it.
Yes.
But the other part of it is, and this is really interesting because it's where a lot of we're certainly by no means the first company to think of this. But what we are trying to do is bring an innovative way to being able to do it.
Yes.
And a big part of that is our operational presence. So at its heart, Snackr is a food delivery app or a food ordering product. But at its heart, it's a logistical problem that we're trying to solve.
Yes.
And so we provide operational staff that are there. So if a staff member comes on 7.5 minutes before an event starts, we'll have someone there that can train them and help them to go through it and troubleshoot if they have issues.
Yes.
We can guide them through the, how to process an order and that kind of thing. Okay. So it's very hands-on. Yeah,
fantastic. So you've talked about, a lot of the sort of development of different features for it's almost a B2B to C type application. And so you've mentioned that sort of customer in the middle. They are businesses, the vendors and or the stadiums, the venues. So are you able to talk about a couple of, let's say, the most exciting products or changes that you made to the existing product and shipped to them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, probably the most exciting one is just in the works at the moment. But really one of the core problems that we're trying to solve is the load problem.
Okay.
So the amount of orders that are going through, if you are ordering through, a food delivery app, you'll get a steady stream of orders over a certain period of time. And if you get overloaded, you'll sort of get paused, and then that's okay because they've got regular service and that kind of thing.
Yes.
For us, there's it's a 2-hour event or 3-hour event.
Yes.
There's really 2 windows where people order. They either order it when they first walk in, or they order at halftime.
Yep.
And a big part of what we're trying to do is change that psyche so that people order at different times.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you're still going to get that rush because it's halftime, it's quarter time, whatever. Then someone looks at their phone and they're going to start doing something.
Yes.
So what we're trying to implement now, which is really exciting, is using our data to understand the profile of an event, to then be able to predict what that volume is going to look like.
Okay.
And to be able to do that, we can do all sorts of things. Like we can, dampen demand at certain times. We can push people to order at certain times.
Yes.
Through promotions and through our marketing channels.
So like dynamic pricing and
Correct.
such.
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent.
But we can also do things like changing capacities. We can inform the staff utilization. So we can say at this time, maybe you want to pause service through Snackr because you normally have a busier time during the event.
Yes.
And so we can use sort of machine learning in that way to be able to overlay configurations over the events that we have, but also just provide a much more rich tapestry of the data that venues are seeing to be able to plan their day better.
Yeah, fantastic. And in terms of the future, do you see any expansion outside of the venue arena? What are your expansion plans and broader sort of product roadmap plans?
Yeah, it's interesting. The expansion outside of that space is again one of the ways that we've seen some of our competitors fail.
Yes.
Is that they've tried to go for this market and then they've been sort of attracted to shiny things in other spaces. So like food halls, conference centers, theaters even.
Okay.
And they're very similar, but there's slightly different problems that need to be solved in those sort of spaces.
Okay.
And so one of the ways that we have been very successful, and this wasn't my strength, I'd say it's the strength of my co-founders, fortunately, is that we've been ultra focused on solving the problems for the specific space that we're working in.
Okay.
And because we're doing that, our solution is really targeted to that.
Yes.
So if we were going to expand into that, it would be a significant sort of strategic pivot from the product.
Yes.
And it would probably be a spin-off product that would operate, it would take a lot of the same stuff, but it would have to be fundamentally different to work in that world.
Okay. Understood. Fantastic. And I suppose the big question that startups always face, particularly now during a difficult market period, is how do you monetize, and how do you monetize at scale? So I'm wondering whether we can dive into how Snackr makes money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, the way that our terms are set up is that we only make money when the vendors and the venues are making money.
Okay.
So really, our value proposition to our clients is that people will order more and they will order more often, and the fans will have a better experience. And so the way that our revenue levers work, especially in the UK at the moment, is that we take a clip on the uplift in transaction value.
Yes.
So what we're trying to say there is that, we're putting money where our mouth is to say that if a venue is increasing transaction size, increasing their overall revenue bucket with Snackr, we'll only take our revenue from that uplift, and they'll be kept whole with what they currently do. So really the way that our transaction, our revenue levers work is that we just take a percentage of the increase in overall revenue to the venues.
Which is 100% aligned with their unit economics.
Well, that's right. And it's one of those, we're in a unique situation where we're sort of win-win-win, right? Like the customer, the fans are winning with a better experience. The venues are winning because they're generating more revenue, and we're winning because we're taking, a commission on that uplift. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think we both referred to it at the beginning of the podcast that we're from Perth, WA. I think it's a great opportunity to see whether there are any sort of takeaways and learnings that you could share with founders back in Australia that are interested in maybe moving overseas, whether it's to, let's say, the UK or to the US. So yeah, what sort of learnings have you had from I mean, it's been a few months that you've been here now, and preparing for the move before that.
Yeah, maybe it would be helpful just to give a bit of background about how we ended up here.
Yeah.
We launched our first MVP, our minimum viable product, initially in February 2020, which was right at the start of, the world shutting down.
Yeah,
And unfortunately for our product, it really relies on live events happening and fans congregating in venues. So we were sort of stymied for about 11 months before we finally launched in Tasmania in December 2020. They had a hub of cricket, and that was great. But then we sort of entered a weird sort of limbo phase where, for a year we were, we were back in Perth. We were still developing the product. We were bringing on venues. Unfortunately, WA was one of those states that had, sort of this weird immunity from COVID because they closed their borders and they were very rigid with that.
Yes.
But we didn't quite have the access to the eastern states, to, other bigger markets, even like the UK and the US that otherwise we might have.
Yeah.
So we got sort of to the end of last year, 2021, and then we're getting quite frustrated with events getting cancelled or even just being reduced capacity. And so we decided to flip up to the UK. We raised about £550,000, so 915,000 Australian, in March this year.
Fantastic.
And then use that capital to flip up to the UK.
Yeah.
And then decided sort of, and the UK was at the back end of that COVID run. And so we decided then to, go for a bigger market. I don't know if I'm the best person to be giving advice to people. It's sort of fumbled my way through, and, you just make the best decision that you can at the time.
Yeah.
But the only thing that I can say about our experience is that not for 1 second have we regretted accelerating our movement to a bigger market.
Yeah.
And I think there's, especially in Perth, there's a feeling of being sort of, you're in a little pond, and you're the big wide world is scary, and what happens if people don't resonate with our idea like they do back home, and that kind of thing. But for us, it hasn't been that experience, and it's sort of one of those things where if you have ambitions to grow your company and have that exponential growth story that every startup wants, you're better off ripping that Band-Aid off sooner rather than later, and making sure you get product market fit in a world where you're actually going to launch that product and be commercial. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful for other founders, but
I'm sure it will be. And I think you were very humble before in your point about, wondering if you should provide advice or not. But, you're on the other side of the world, so I think you're very well qualified.
We'll see.
But in terms of fundraising, was the round you did you do that in Australia?
Yes, yeah. So we did an accelerator program, and then we, at the end of that, had a really good relationship with the fund that sort of was associated with that program.
Yeah.
We had a long-term relationship with them beforehand. They'd sort of followed our journey all the way through.
Okay.
And then they anchored that raise as sort of the cornerstone investor.
Yeah.
And we've done friends and family raise before that. We brought on a couple of other investors, so it wasn't sort of new territory for us to bring on capital.
Yeah.
But it was exciting for us to get that money away, especially in a period where it was difficult for the events industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And and this may be a bit of a premature sort of question, but do you see there's going to be differences raising capital here versus back home?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and that's another reason for flipping up to a bigger market if you can, and if you sort of see the legs there, is that there's just a lot more investors, there's a lot more capital, there's a lot more funds with dry powder.
Yes.
There's sort of, it's definitely more competitive, but there's also more opportunity.
Yep.
And you get to cut your teeth, against sort of potentially some more sort of shrewd, markets. So
Yeah.
I think it'll be very different. I think the valuation metrics are different. The way that people evaluate, it's probably a more mature environment in the UK.
Yes.
I think Perth has actually quite a good ecosystem for VCs now, or for startups now, compared to sort of where it was 5-10 years ago. But it's not the biggest place in the world, so it can be hard. But no, I think that it's going to be very different, and we're actually gearing up for a capital raise now, which we'll look to close out by the end of the year. So I'm not sure when this is actually going to air, but we might be in the throes of it then. But we'll see how we go.
Excellent. And so, going back to sort of venues and events, we're arguably, I'm not sure, whether the statistics at time of airing are going to show that we're in a recession or not. And, there's a lot of things happening in the UK at this point in time. How do live events and venues perform during, recessions or downturns?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that there's been a real boom time pre-COVID for events, and then there was obviously a disaster zone there where nothing was happening. There was no revenue coming in the door. But there will be, I think, challenges ahead for at a macroeconomic level across the board, and that definitely if it's hitting people's wallets, then one of the first things to go is discretionary spend on things like tickets, buying food and drinks when you're out and that kind of thing. And I think that venues will, these venues, these clubs now, they're so intelligent, they're so well connected. They know their fan through and through. I think they'll be ahead of it, and I think they'll be fine.
Okay. Yes.
And a big part of it, right, is they create, I'm a huge sports fan, and you just have that loyalty that maybe it's not the first discretionary spend to go, but in terms of how it affects us, it's, really for us, we need to position ourselves as a profit center for these venues.
Yes.
So, if someone's coming in to pitch something to, a general manager of a stadium, they're sort of looking at it like, is this going to cost me money? Is this going to make me money?
Yeah.
And so they need to understand that, we are only ever going to make them money. And if we don't make them money, then, we don't take any money. So, ultimately, that's what's going to hold us in good stead through this period.
How do you help vendors to improve staff utilization and reduce waste management?
Yeah, it's a really big value driver for our clients. Staffing is their biggest cost center, and to the extent that they can, manage their waste better, that's sort of their margin.
Yeah.
And so in terms of the staff utilization, we do that in a number of ways. One is that we can be really flexible with the way that we activate a venue. So we can just do delivery if they want to do that, or we can just do pickup.
Yes.
Or we can do pickup and delivery, and we can sort of tailor that to the different areas that are in the venue depending on how it's set up.
Okay.
But a lot of our venues, when they just sort of want to try it out, is they just want to do pickup.
Yes.
And so they can use their existing staff to be able to do that, and without any sort of additional staffing costs there. But the other way that we really improve their staff utilization is by activating their staff when they're otherwise idle.
Yes.
And it's really interesting because I had never really walked around a stadium until I started doing Snackr, when the game's actually on or the concert's on, because you're watching the game or you're watching the concert. But if you do, you walk around, and for 90% of the event, they're standing around doing nothing.
Yeah.
So you have to staff this venue for the rush time, start of the game or half time, but the staff are only ever doing something at that time, and then otherwise you have all these people that are standing around doing nothing.
Yeah.
And so what we can do, which we've seen some venues really optimize and generate heaps more revenue out of, is they'll turn off Snackr for those busy times, so everyone focuses on regular service. Then during the quiet times, they'll activate Snackr, and they'll have their staff doing deliveries, they'll have staff doing pickups, that kind of thing, and then it gets too busy again and they can pause or turn it off. And so that's a really effective way that they can take their existing staff and get 20% more value out of those people that are in there.
Yes.
In terms of the waste management, it's it's a massive problem because you know a lot of it's frozen food, or it's fresh stuff that you have to throw away. It's perishable, and so you'll thaw all this frozen food out. You have all this perishable food, and then at the end of an event, you didn't have as many people. It was colder, so people didn't order as many ice creams as you thought they would, and then you have to sort of get rid of it. And so what we can do is we can actively activate fans to say, there's, 50 hot dogs which are ready to go. And we can activate those fans to say, like, there's discounts that are on there. But we can also feed our data back into the venues to be able to give them a better idea about when people are ordering what items.
Yes.
And use that to be able to understand their fan better. And that sort of all leads back to, managing their waste.
That's fantastic. And I think in terms of the levers that we discussed before, things like revenue management, dynamic pricing, that could be a great way to, ensure that although that food would go to waste otherwise, let's try and, give a discount and help it get into a fan's stomach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, looking forward, if we can really nail this AI ML, predictive, analysis, we can really show, look, normally there's this many burgers that are coming up in the next 45-minute window. Maybe you should prepare those. And so they don't have to takes the guesswork out of saying, oh, we'll chuck, 50 burgers on and hope that that's the right number.
Yeah.
We can really put some science and rigor around that to more effectively hone in on, how to optimize those vendors.
Yeah, for sure. So in the e-commerce space, you've got players like Amazon, Instacart, and Klarna, all of whom offer advertising to different partners and merchants on their platform. So, Amazon, you're always seeing recommended products. Instacart, you might go to look at drinks and you might see a vendor sponsoring a particular drink. Klarna, there are ads popping up when you're shopping within the app. Have you thought about a sort of monetization strategy that goes beyond just sales?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're always looking for ways that we can drive more value for our clients. Ultimately, and it's something that we've definitely thought about. And I think initially we sort of thought of a, sanitized version of Snackr where, it was purely just, ordering through the app.
Yeah.
In reality, it is a massive part of the business, and really the way that we differentiate from those other products is that we try we do work with our venues and our clients to make sure that the deals work with them, and then all of that revenue is split with the client. So, if they have a deal with, a major food supplier, Coca-Cola, Red Bull, Diageo, something like that.
Yes.
If we do a deal with them, we'll do it in partnership with the venue. Everyone's making more money out of it. They get the exposure. We can do things, like, menu mechanics to promote their products. We can use them in banner ads and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we can even do push notifications to, via text message and that kind of thing to say, to push their products and promos, to help the purchase instance of their certain products. But it's definitely something that we're, really keen to explore. And for us, it's on our roadmap to become real market leaders in that space.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think it's a particularly important space or revenue stream for companies to look into, because it's attracting or it's increasing revenue without really a significant increase of the cost of goods sold, because, you mentioned before that staff are a huge cost to these vendors, but doing a partnership ad to sponsor a product doesn't require any staffing costs, but it does increase revenue. So there's quite a nice margin on that line of business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, really the key for us, and we've done a lot of, research and market sounding on this, but it's about making it work for the venue and the club.
Yes.
So, we're not just, in one venue that's sponsored by Coca-Cola and promoting Pepsi. It's aligned with their values. It's aligned with their, the agreements they already have in place. And as you said, it's as easy as, providing that platform for them to be able to push more product.
Yes, absolutely. And we've spoken a fair bit about vendors. Let's jump back to customers. what type of behaviors are you seeing with customers? I know there are some apps where you find, all right, if a customer orders, let's say groceries 3 times, then they're going to be a retained sort of customer. Facebook, I think, had their famous metric where if somebody adds 10 friends in 7 days, then, you know, they were going to stick into the app. What type of behaviors are you seeing translate into retention for Snackr?
Yeah, it's we're still learning in that space for sure, but it's there's a couple of things. One is to get people on board first, like just straight away.
Yeah.
Is it needs to be really frictionless. So
Okay.
you know, any sort of obstacle, you know, and that's why we pivoted away from a native app.
Yeah.
To avoid people downloading it. If the connections, you know, it's not optimized for poor connection. If you have that kind of experience, then you know that will turn people off.
Yes.
So that sort of first activation is really important. And then it's about changing their behavior. So, you know, at the moment, you know, when you first introduce Snackr to your venue, you'll see a lot of the orders sort of peak at the same times that the normal orders will peak.
Yes.
And then if you get people that are coming again and again, they'll learn that they can order at any time because what's the difference? So I can order in the middle of a half and it doesn't matter because I'm not going to miss the game. And so you'll see the demand curve flatten out, you know, slowly but surely.
Yes.
And so for us, it's really about, you know, as you said, creating enough touch points, enough, you know, times where that fan will reorder that it becomes a habit and an expectation of them when they go to that venue that I don't have to wait in line.
Yeah.
And so, it's such an interesting space about, you know, what people's psychology is and what gets them coming back and sort of it's been a real learning curve for me, especially because I sort of didn't have a background in that space.
Yes.
But for us, it's about, you know, enough touch points marketing wise so that they're aware of it, really frictionless onboarding process, and then, you know, getting them using it 2-3 times and understanding that it's available not just at times when you would otherwise, you know, think about going to get food and drinks at a stadium.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Really good takeaways, and particularly the last one, because then you can change behavior so that fans know that they can order during slow periods, which ultimately helps the vendors who otherwise wouldn't have made sales during that time.
Exactly right. That's right.
Fantastic. Excellent. And look, Matt, anything that you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
Not really. Thanks for having me on. I think always great to, you know, meet a fellow West Aussie in London, and you know, I was glad we could get connected and sort of, you know, do this. It's been really fun.
Mate, look, thanks so much for telling us about Snackr and you know, particularly how you're driving a great experience both for customers at the stadium, but you're also helping vendors to drive up their revenues. So that's an excellent story for everyone to hear. So thank you so much for joining us.
Lovely. Thanks, mate.